Hello, this is saxophonist Antonio Parker, and this is a conversation in jazz, where we are promoting jazz and telling the stories. Our guest today is the veteran jazz pianist and educator, Mr. Wade Beach. We ask you to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon so we can let you know when we are posting another video or going live. We also ask you to donate to our Cash App in order to support the channel and help us to produce future videos. Our Cash App is $Jazzology 101. That's $Jazzology 101. Enjoy the video. Hi, I'm saxophonist Antonio Parker, and this is a conversation in jazz. Today we have one of the great veteran jazz pianists here in the DMV. He has performed with the likes of Eddie Harris, Billy Harper, Gary Bartz, Richie Cole, Grady Tate, Keter Betts, and the late great Andrew White, to name a few. He is also an educator who has taught in Prince George's Community College, Northern Virginia Community College, George Mason University, the Charlie Byrd House of Music, the Capone Music Studio, and at the Landon School in Bethesda, Maryland. He was also a member of the Air Force Band and the legendary Airmen of Note. Please welcome my good brother, the great jazz pianist, Mr. Wade Beach. Wade, welcome to a conversation in jazz.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate being here.
Yes, sir. I don't know where we met.
I know it was on a gig.
It had to be. But we've known each other for a long time. And I always really dug your playing.
Oh, well, thank you.
You're always a consummate musician. So I'm just honored to be able to interview you and find some things we may not know.
I'm honored to be here.
Oh, thank you. So this is a conversation in jazz. And as I say, we like to learn the story behind the story. So my first question is, who is Wade Beach?
Who am I? Wow. That's a big question. And when I figure it out, I will
let you know. Well, we do know you're a wonderful piano player. Do you have any children?
Yes, I have one son.
Okay, you have a son, okay. And where are you from?
Well, I was born in Baltimore, Johns Hopkins.
Wow.
Yeah.
You was born in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm. My folks lived there for quite a little while.
Every time I interview someone from Baltimore, there's something in the water in Baltimore. There's some just great musicians that come out of Baltimore. Now, did you grow up in Baltimore?
No, my dad went to the Maryland Institute of Art. He had artistic talent in the actual art field.
Okay.
And so he got a classical education in art there, which is right across the street from Peabody.
Okay.
And they lived on Monroe Street up there, and my mom and dad got married, lived with my grandmom, and they lived in Baltimore quite a while. But after I was born, he got a job. Well, after he graduated, he worked for the Baltimore Sun in the advertising department.
Okay.
And then he got a better offer from the Evening Star, which doesn't exist anymore, which is down this way. Mm-hmm. So then he moved to Maryland to
So how old were you at that time?
Oh, I was only about 3 years old.
Oh, okay. So all right. So you didn't hang in Baltimore?
I didn't hang, except a 3-year hang.
Okay. But you got the Baltimore spirit because they produce some wonderful musicians.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I went back and did a lot of gigs in Baltimore.
We're going to talk about some of that.
Okay.
So you grew up in what part of Maryland, primarily?
Basically, area near it's Silver Spring, near University of Maryland.
And what was it like growing up in that area?
The music scene, or just
in general? I mean, did you come up with? Was there a music scene?
Well, yeah, but see, when I was younger, I was interested in the music I was hearing on the radio. So all the Motown music and music that I would listen to. That my father was interested in jazz.
Okay.
And that's how I got the ear for jazz.
Oh wow.
Because even though it wasn't my favorite music at the time, primarily because I didn't understand it, and I didn't know the language that well. It wasn't like there wasn't something there that I could relate to that much. But Motown had some of the basics, of jazz. I think it had that feel.
So are you the only child?
No, I have a brother.
Oh, you have a brother. Okay. Was he musically inclined as well?
No, I don't. Well, he enjoyed music, but he didn't go into he didn't seek a music career. He worked at worked for the government in finance.
So was piano your first instrument?
Yep.
And what made you choose piano?
Well, my dad played the piano, and we had a piano,
Okay.
so it was almost convenience.
Yeah. So did you start out self-taught, or did you start out learning formally?
I had some lessons when I was real little, but the main part of let's say that my beginning was because of being the stuff I did on my own.
Okay.
I like when I was listening to my neighbor play that little piece Für Elise by Beethoven, and I listened to it and retained, and I was 8 years old, 9 years old, something. And I retained enough of it to come back home and work it out on the piano just by ear.
Wow.
It's not that hard a piece, it's got 2 chords in it, and wasn't any harder than the Motown songs I was listening to.
So did music come easy for you?
Well, I think for every musician who has, everybody's born with talent to do something.
Gotcha.
What you have to find is what that is. So, and then when you find that, your talent, your natural talent, I think, goes to a certain point. And then at that point, you hit a brick wall, and then you have to really, really dig in.
Yeah.
And so I had a certain amount, but I don't think I had, as much as I see other people have. But it doesn't leave me.
But you said your dad played?
My dad played, but he played as a diversion from being an artist,
Gotcha.
from all that he had to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. I also think that some things get passed down. Like if your parents was a musician.
Oh, okay. He maybe had that creative gene or whatever that is, and then maybe that came to me from him.
Yeah. So do you have perfect pitch?
No,
No?
I do not. Yeah, I wouldn't mind having it, but I tried to develop it at one time, and I had to come to the realization that having perfect pitch is the same if you were so we can relate to different colors because we can see them. Now, if you were to see the color red for just a millisecond, just very, very short period of time, like almost none, you would say that's red, even though you only heard it that long. Saw it that long. And a person with perfect pitch doesn't go, well, that sounds like it's close to this or that or that. They don't figure it at all. They're born with the same ability for pitch, and they'll hear it like as soon as they hear a B flat. That's it. Yeah. Right now.
You think you can learn that?
I don't.
No, you think you're born with it?
I think you can learn relative pitch, which is what I have. Every course that I've ever seen that teaches perfect pitch teaches it from the perspective of relative pitch. Yeah. So they teach you to be able to always hear. Let's say you always hear the note B flat or E or whatever they pick, or A. And then you can relate all the other. Well, that's what you do when you have relative pitch. Yeah. It's just that somebody gives you that pitch. Yeah. So there's really no difference. You're not going to be able to hear it the way a person was. Perfect. It's the same as saying, I think. Now here's my, just my opinion, but it's the same as saying if you're born colorblind, you can learn to see colors. I don't think that's true. Wow. I've known people that were colorblind. My father even worked with a guy, an artist that was colorblind.
Really?
Yeah. So that's the same as maybe a musician not having perfect pitch.
But how come certain people are blessed with it or cursed with it?
Well,
And
that's what they'll say too. Because if the band is out of tune, they can't stand it, and they almost modulate to that key up half step or something. But how come? Now I think you have to ask a person that knows more about heredity than I know. I'm not schooled in that.
You think it's like a part of your brain?
I think it is, but I think it is inherited, and I think we inherit things from people going way back, and so why do we all see colors? Most of us see different colors, but most of us don't have perfect pitch. That might go back, to like way, thousands of years, where people were just on survival mode, and they had to be able to see colors in order to differentiate between the berries that'll kill you and the ones that won't. All the people that ate those red berries, they're gone. But ones that could tell the difference. Now, to be able to tell different specific pitches, I don't think that was a survival thing. I think they had to be able to tell high pitch from low pitch, because the low pitch is the big animals. Let's get out of here, and the ones that didn't skedaddle were.
So check this out. There's now this. I don't know if this ties into that, but they're I think this was last Thanksgiving. My kid's mom's brother, I guess brother-in-law. Anyway, he played a note on his phone. I couldn't hear it, but his daughter could hear it.
Was it a high pitch?
It was a real high pitch. And it's like, and I'm like, he asked me, "Do you hear that?" I said, "No." And he asked his little daughter. She said, "Yes." And so, what is that?
Again, it's it's one of those things that's built into the system.
But you can lose part of your high end hearing.
Oh well, you
over
can
time
lose
too, right?
you can lose some hearing. I mean, I have a certain amount of tinnitus where I'm hearing. I'm like right now, I can hear a pitch.
Wow.
A real high pitch. I mean, that's from playing in loud bands all my life.
You know what note it is?
Big bands. It's so high I can't really tell. It's
Okay.
it's like what they call a white sound or something, white noise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I've known people who were not musicians who had perfect pitch. I knew a shoe salesman, and I had two little kids that were twins, and one of them came in, and I was trying to teach him to hear, as well as like when I teach, I try to teach some oral skills as well. So I said to him, well, if you listen to this note I was teaching from relative pitch, I said you relate it to this, then you'll be able to tell what it is. And you know what he says to me? He says, "Well, can't I just tell you what it is?"
Wow.
So I said, "Wait a minute, are you telling me you could hear it before I said all this?" And he said, "Yeah." And I started playing notes for him, and he could tell me what the notes were without looking.
Wow.
And he had never had any piano lessons hardly. And then his brother comes in. His brother's mother wanted me to teach both of them, so his brother comes in. He's got the same thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is. Wow.
So, and both of them went into music, but I think last I heard they were into Christian music and doing that.
I had a situation similar to that when I was teaching elementary school. I had a little kid, Timothy Wiggins, and at the end of the day, he would run in the music room to play on his xylophone. I would chase him out because I was tired. I would, So it was the end of school. He came running in. I let him. So he started playing "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star" and some other "Ain't Missed a Note," and I said, well, let me test his ear. So I gave him all the white keys on the piano. Once I associated the sound with those notes, he was able to rattle them all.
Wow. And see, that's the same thing. You think about when we're little and we learn the names of different colors.
Yeah.
Once we learn the names, once you learn green, red, whatever, you just see it that long, and you know what it is.
Do you find that the students that you've taught who've had perfect pitch have more of a predisposition towards music, or they can pick up music easier than most?
I think they have just about the same problems as everyone else. It's just that I mean, let's relate it back to colors again. Okay, my dad was really fine artist. I can see all the colors. I got no talent when it comes to art. I cannot draw a straight line, and every time I draw, I draw a dog or whatever, he's got a little tiny head and a big giant back end here. I don't have any sense of proportion. I got none of that.
I know a guy, a friend of mine at Howard. I ain't gonna say his name, but a good friend. And we all was trying to learn how to play this jazz thing, but he could come in, and you could be playing a tune like Fee Fi Fo Fun, and he could play all the right notes. Just he has perfect pitch, and he can you could those obscure changes. He just can hear it and play all the right notes.
Well, the way I look at it, I've known people like that, and before they really develop their musical understanding, they're hearing all that in what I would call vertically. It's kind of separate from the rest, but you have to get to where you hear it horizontally, where everything connects.
Wow.
So like if you were able to duplicate the sound of someone speaking in some language you didn't know, you might be able to duplicate each word, but you might not have any idea what the sentence was about.
Wow. Yeah. Now, would you say that, and I know you study formally because you had to at this point, but initially, did you start off and just self-taught and then got some formal training?
Well, I mean, maybe we should talk about when a person gets that initial spark. So maybe you're exposed to some music at a certain age and you're kind of like bored, just like being in your first, English class or whatever. And then all of a sudden something goes, kind of hits you like, oh, yeah. And like I say, I was listening to those Motown songs and songs before Motown, and that's what was catching my ear. And I started figuring out, just like I did that Fur Elise.
Self-taught, right?
Yeah, self-taught. And I didn't even know what chords were. I couldn't make a major, minor chord or whatever. I could tell what the right notes were because of the way it sounded. And I, by ear. And those guys weren't playing anything too complicated. So it was just right on my level.
But so I ask you that because how you learn is just as important as what you learn. I came up with that. No, well, maybe.
I think that's true.
So I started learning music from a whole note. This is notice B, 4 beats, half note. And so I was learning with my eyes and thinking of, I wasn't lodging to sound. So when you tell me you were learning those chords just through your ear, you were learning music, whereas I was learning how to read music.
Well, I did know how to read from my early years, but not that good. In fact, I did my early lessons by sound too.
Really?
Because my teacher didn't have, she had mostly students that were paying attention to what like you say, what you're doing with your eyes. But I would always ask my teacher to play, and I had these simple little pieces, It's basically they're trying to teach you how to read the notes. And so when she would play them for me, I would remember what she played, and I'd go home and I'd practice. I wouldn't even open the book. I just practiced it from what I heard. And then it was about, I don't know, I was taking lessons for maybe 2 years and I never practiced, And she points to a note and says, well, what's that note? I said, I don't know.
Wow.
So I was, she said, well, how are you doing your music? I said, well, I guess I have to tell you, I do it from watching you play. So from then on, she didn't play it for me anymore.
Wow. That's heavy.
Well, yeah.
The late great drummer, Ralph Peterson once told me, he said, music is a mirror of the mind. And see, that's what I'm saying.
It is.
That's what seems like you had it in your mind. And then you figured it out on the instrument.
Yeah, well, and the reading was slow because of that.
Yeah.
You know,
See, I was always a good reader.
Yeah.
But when I had to play something by ear, I had to struggle. So I had to, I'm still trying to work on my ear to this day.
Well, when I was I went finally when I majored in music many years later, and I had this great teacher, Evelyn Garvey, who was John Garvey. I don't know if you remember him from the jazz world, but he was a great jazz instructor. Anyway, Evelyn was an unbelievable sight reader. I mean, you could just take a paintbrush and splatter it on the page,
Wow.
and she would read it just exactly right. I mean, she read all this modern music, this stuff that was just unbelievably hard to read, and I would just, my jaw would be on the floor every time I saw her do that. I said, how do you do that? I said, you get it, you look at it, and immediately it goes to your fingers. And she said, well, that's where you're missing something. And I said, well, what do you mean? She says, it goes from my eyes to my ears to my fingers.
Wow.
And she says, if it doesn't go to my ears first, it's not going to come out my fingers right.
Wow.
So it's not, she says, music is not an eye-hand coordination thing. It's an eye-ear hand. It's really an ear hand, but in order to get to the ears, it has to go to the eyes first, because if it's written.
Wow. Okay, I wish I'd have known that.
Well, that's how you find, like, way back to Andrew, they're talking about, he could
The
look
great
at
Andrew
something.
White. Yeah,
the great
yeah.
Andrew White. He could look at music, and you knew he was hearing it.
Well, he was born with some stuff.
Oh, yeah, well, that's, yeah.
We're going to talk about Andrew, but that's, Andrew White. Now, did you study classical, at any point, did you study classical piano?
Well, a lot, yeah.
Okay.
Going into my little Motown bands and garage bands, we called them garage bands, right? And different. We'd have maybe a 4-piece group, and every time we rehearsed at that house, the parents went out to dinner.
Wow.
Because we made a lot of racket.
Yeah.
So I went through my my garage band phase, and eventually I was in bands where we're going out on the weekends and making some money. But music became more. I started out in college majoring in language because I was good at that. Again, I did that by ear. I never studied that either.
Really? You majored in language?
Yeah.
So you speak a few languages?
Well, when I was in high school, I went out here to Good Counsel, and we had Latin all 4 years and French for most of that. And I would basically not study, but I would just go by ear from what I heard in the classroom, and I would get really good grades in not in everything else, chemistry, physics, all that, kind of getting there. But languages came really easy, and when I think back on that, I think that was because of the ear too, because I really didn't study it. I just could tell what sounded right. I didn't even know why.
Wow.
But when I got to college, it goes beyond that. You got to study.
Yeah.
So I barely making it for a couple of years, and then in my junior year, I was just practicing I got practicing more and more and more till I was practicing hours and hours every day. And I was playing a lot of classical music, Bach, and a lot of Bach, and some other composers too, on my own again. And so my dad looked at my report card and said, well, you're spending all your time practicing music, and you're getting not good grades here. So I was in my junior year at that. I was getting by, but he said, why don't we try you majoring in music and see what happens? all of a sudden, I'm on the dean's list. And that was obviously the right decision. So I I did classical music for those next 2 years with Evelyn Garvey. I set myself. I was behind a lot of the students because they were juniors now. Some of them really playing well, and I'm just kind of off my own. I studied with her that summer, but I decided, okay, if I had a job, I'd be working 8 hours a day. So I'm going to set myself up on an 8-hour practicing schedule every day. So I practiced for the next 2 years, and most of my masters, and most time I practiced 8 hours a day, and I'd get up
were you
early in the
practicing
morning.
technique, or were you developing your reading as well?
As you go along, as you know from your own experience, you have a practice schedule. You have a routine that you develop, and you think you're going to really get good by doing this particular routine. And it's not the same thing for all the hours. You practiced a lot of hours. You play so well. I mean, you can't just. And if you tell me you did that by just not having to practice at all,
I had to practice.
Yeah, well, see, everybody does. So I divided it up in different ways that I thought would be best for that time period. And I think from one time period to the next, you change that.
Gotcha.
So in my first years, I practiced 2 hours of scales because I didn't know all my scales.
Wow.
So I practiced 2 hours of scales, and my dad bought a nice Steinway piano, put it in the basement. He made a mistake of putting it under its bedroom because I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and did 2 hours of scales until 6 o'clock. And my mom, later on, she said, "Is he trying to drive us crazy?"
Wow.
So, but he didn't want to stop me because I was doing something, you know. And so
you could tell you had a passion for it.
Yeah. So I practiced 2 hours of scales. Then I had all my pieces to do. So you had to play a piece from each time, the Baroque, classical, romantic, and contemporary. So I would spend a certain amount of time on each one of those pieces from the different time periods. So, it went up to...
Did you ever play any other instruments?
Well, just the organ, but I didn't play another... I had to major in another instrument. I had a minor in another instrument in school. Okay. Everybody does.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, what other instrument do I want to play? And I thought, well, it's just going to take away from my piano practicing. So I thought, I'm going to major in voice.
Oh, wow.
Minor in voice.
Okay.
And so I didn't have a very good voice, but I did have relative pitch by then.
Okay.
So gotcha. I could find the notes.
Gotcha.
So anyway.
Now, did you play in your middle school and high school?
No, where I went to school at Good Counsel, they were just starting out, and they had almost no musical program. They had some vocal. They had a vocal group.
So most of your musical groups start to happen in college.
Yeah, except for my garage bands, which were through high school.
So when did the jazz bug? When did you start digging jazz?
Wow, well, that was an evolution. Now, did you just dig it all of a sudden from the very beginning, or did it kind of evolve?
Say again? Me?
Yeah.
I heard jazz the first time I heard it. When I heard, I tell people this story. When I about 12, I started taking lessons at a settlement music school in South Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. And so I would go for my saxophone lesson. I was actually taking saxophone and piano lessons. I would hear this strange sound coming from the bass. And so I would go down, and it was a little Joey DeFrancesco. He's about 10.
Oh, man.
Joey DeFrancesco.
Oh, man.
Robert Landon.
Oh, man.
Lewis Taylor. Leonard Richardson. All these,
little giant babies.
Yeah. Cats that were and they were playing this music, man. It just blew me away.
Oh, I bet.
And so I want to do this. And then I heard Bird for the first time. As a kid, I was blown away. I was just one of them kids that you didn't have to sell jazz to me. Mm-hmm. It just, when I first heard it, it just knocked me out.
Wow. Well, it didn't happen that way for me, although it did it did evolve. So when I first was, well, like I say, I think there were some of the elements of jazz in Motown music, and when I'd hear a solo, I'd want to be able to do that solo, but I didn't know how to do it. I was looking for the music for it. There is no music. He was making it up.
Yeah.
So I was always curious as to how to do that, and I started making solos up of my own on music. I would play them exactly the same every time.
On the Motown kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we used to make records that were played on these pop stations and stuff. People were copying my solo and all.
Yeah.
People I knew anyway. But when I first started getting interested in jazz was when I heard people like Ray Charles and Ramsey Lewis and Les McCann. Those guys caught my ear, and Eddie Harris,
Yeah.
Those kind of guys that were playing like blues and that kind of
funky
thing.
kind of jazz.
Yeah, funky jazz with a heavy swing.
Yeah. Now, how old were you around this?
Well, I was, I kind of got into jazz kind of late because I did my bachelor's and my master's degree in piano performance at Maryland.
Wow.
So I had to play a lot of concerts. So I had to practice really, really hard. I didn't have much time to practice jazz.
So in college, you wasn't really playing a lot of jazz?
Not any jazz.
Wow.
So I was getting into it, though. I was really getting attracted to it. And,
Were any of the students playing jazz around?
Yeah, well, they were jam sessions, so I used to go to jam sessions, but pretty much didn't play. And,
where would you go?
Well, one time I went over John Malachi's house. He was having sessions over there.
Really?
Yeah, my dad found out about it from somebody that he worked with. My dad had, there's a lot of artists, but they were interested in music too. And so my dad took me over there. I guess I must have been underage. I must have been under driving age. I was probably about 14 or 15.
Wow.
But I was already enough interested in jazz to use my ear to copy, and so I was copying Oscar Peterson at that time.
Wow.
And I would copy every note he played. I had
You mean transcribing?
Transcribed the whole thing. I transcribed
even the voicing and all that?
The voicings, the bass solo, everything. And I would get together in practice rooms and write out the bass solo for the bass part for the bass player. He was a classical player. But I write out what Ray Brown was doing, and I would have my part all in my head. I wouldn't write it down again. And so I did the entire album of We Get Requests.
Wow.
I did the whole thing. And so so I went over to John Malachi's, but I was sitting in the corner. I wanted to be not seen, And so he had all these people playing, singers, and a lot of singers. So he finally looks over, he notices me, and he said, "Well, young man, why are you here?" I said, "Well, I came to hear some music." He said, "We don't just hear music here; we play too. So I want you to come up here and play for me."
Wow!
And then I just got like butterflies and nerves. I said, "Well, I don't really, I can't really play any jazz." He said, "Well, what do you mean you don't play any jazz? And what are you doing here?" He said, "Well, I like jazz. I love jazz." I'd gotten to where I really loved it. I mean, when I would listen to Oscar and those guys, I knew there was something different happening inside of me. So I would transcribe the whole thing because there wasn't any music.
Okay.
I did that with Ray Charles too. I did the whole thing, whole thing on what I say, all that. So, so I played. Wow, what did I play? I think I was playing Oscar Peterson's version of Satin Doll or something off of that recording. But I had his whole solo worked out. And of course, John had heard that recording a number of times. And when I started playing the solo, and I was playing every note, and every hit down here, just the way Oscar did it, or at least as close as I could hear. I'm sure I got a bunch of it wrong, but it was close.
Yeah.
And John was standing right next to me, and then he was watching and watching and watching. All of a sudden, he breaks out laughing. He can't believe that some kid is playing every note that Oscar Peterson played on this thing.
Wow. And
he said, "Well, you know any more off of that recording?" He said, "Well, now I know." He said, he asked me if I knew any more. I said, "Yeah, I worked the whole thing, all those tunes out." He said, "Well, now I know you can play like Oscar Peterson, but you need to play like you."
Wow. Yeah.
And you know what? I didn't even know what he was talking about. What do you mean play like me? I mean, I play like Bach. I play Bach's music. It's all right. I play somebody else's music, Chopin. But what do you mean play like me? That I'm playing Oscar's notes. And when I went to hear Oscar, I went to Baltimore and at the Lyric Theater, I think it was, and heard Oscar's trio with Ray Brown and Ed Thigpen. And oh man, I thought, wow, those are the real guys there.
Wow.
Those aren't just pictures on my album. We had albums.
Yeah. I remember those.
You remember albums.
Yeah.
So so Oscar was playing one of the tunes on the recording, and I expected him to play that solo.
Wow.
I mean, I thought that was memorized.
Oh, you thought he's going
I thought that was just like in the classic. If you go hear somebody play that.
And he played something else.
He played something else, and I'm thinking, wow, he's worked out another solo. And when I heard him again and he did it different again, I realized he doesn't work any of this out. He's making it up right on the spot.
Yeah.
And that really scared me.
Wow.
Because I thought, how can you get to where you can do that? Because I realized you have to have such a vast knowledge of the vocabulary that just the way we're speaking now, we know a lot of words in English. If somebody said, "Okay, now switch to French," I go,
So what was your process from getting to where you were to now being able to play Wade Beach?
Well, I knew that I wouldn't be able to do that on my own.
Okay.
I really knew that.
Yeah.
Because it was a completely different process.
Uh-huh.
So no matter how many solos I memorized, I couldn't use them if I was supposed to.
Yeah.
If I was playing on this tune and I had solos memorized from other tunes, I wasn't going to be able to use them. Those notes aren't going to work. Mm-hmm. I gotta have new notes on the spot.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's crazy. Who can do that?
Yeah.
Then you find out, well, Bach could do that, and
Yeah.
Mozart could do that. So Oscar Peterson can do that.
Uh-huh.
So, and a lot of other people. Bill Evans could do that. I came to Bill Evans still thinking that way when I first heard him at one of the jazz festivals.
Wow.
And I thought, well, he's not playing the right solo.
Really? Wow.
He said, what's he doing now? That's because his notes were so perfect.
Yeah, yeah.
I just thought you had to have that worked out.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
he was also improvising. Anyway, so what I decided I had to do was take some lessons. And at that time at school, I was taken from Evelyn. The piano player by the name of Gene Rush, he was well known around this town, but he moved away, and so nobody really knows about him too much. He passed away a few years ago, but there was a trio down at the Bohemian Caverns called the Trio ESP, mm-hmm. and it was Steve Novosel, mm-hmm. young Steve Novosel, and young Gene Rush, mm-hmm. college age, and I think it was Jimmy Hops playing drums.
Wow.
And Gene was actually coming to Maryland to learn some classical music from Evelyn, so that he could get a bachelor's degree. He wanted to teach at a college
mm-hmm.
in a place wherever he moved to. Anyway, so I met him there just through. I mean, it's almost like divine intervention.
Wow.
I met him through Evelyn Garvey, mm-hmm. and when I found out that he was playing down at Bohemian Caverns, then I went down and heard that trio.
Wow.
And they were really good,
mm-hmm.
and they knocked me out. I mean, they were playing with all these different people coming through town. Whoever came, if Eddie Harris came through town, they'd
mm-hmm.
be playing with him if anybody came through town. And then, of course, I had been listening to Ramsey Lewis mm-hmm. and all those guys I was telling you about. And when I came to Gene, he's talking about, Wynton Kelly. And other people I hadn't really studied that much,
mm-hmm.
And I'm talking to Oscar Peterson. He says, yeah, but, what about Bud Powell? What about this guy? And so he was giving me Bud Powell tunes to learn.
Wow.
And so he wanted me to go home, and since he knew I could do it by ear, he wanted me to go home and learn their solos.
Mm-hmm.
Since, I'm being influenced by these Oscar Peterson solos, how about getting influenced by Bud Powell solos or Wynton Kelly solos, Tommy Flanagan?
Now, did that become easy for you to be able to learn these solos off the record?
Yeah, I could do it. I could do that pretty well. That was accessible for me.
Wow.
I could do it, but I couldn't do anything on my own. And Gene was going in the same direction as John was. Now you got to figure out how to do your own solo.
Yeah.
And of course Chick Corea was hitting the scene then too.
Wow.
So he had transcribed some Chick Corea tunes and
uh-huh.
he said he laid on me. And I didn't understand that at all. And so he just said, well, you're gonna have to do your own solos. So what I did was I started taking tunes, and one note at a time, instead of transcribing, I'd write out my own solo.
Okay.
And I'd have a whole pile of solos on the same tune. And he was trying to get me to the point where I could make it up on my own. But he knew that I wasn't ready to do anything spontaneously yet. And Evelyn used to have jam sessions over her house.
Okay.
And I'd go over there, and Gene would go over there. And, of course, Gene was the hero, because it was all a bunch of college kids who could just barely play any jazz. Mm-hmm. And Gene would sit down, and it's like, oh, my, one of these, And I'd sit down, and it's like, oh, it's him, Well, at least he's studying with Gene. Uh-huh. But, I couldn't get through... I couldn't get through a well-known standard without losing the form.
Oh, wow.
I would go to the bridge in the wrong place, and I would, and so Gene, it was good that he heard me trying to play a solo because then he knew what my weaknesses were. Coming to a lesson, you don't really know all that.
Yeah. So was there a point where you start to get it and say, oh,
Well, there was.
Yeah.
There was a point where I started to get it, but it was from going to a lot of jam sessions. I wasn't ready to go to any gigs.
Yeah.
And finally, there's a place called the Top of the Foolery that piano player who was teaching at University of Maryland called Ron Elliston. Yeah, he was a well-known guy in his town at one point. And he was playing. I was going there. Well, and this thing at the Caverns, it wasn't just a one-night thing. I mean, because Steve, when I talk to Steve, he says, man, you were over at the Caverns so much, I thought you were living there. I was there every night.
Really?
Back night after night. Whatever Gene did, I did it. If he sneezed, I made sure I sneezed right there.
Wow, yeah, wow.
But anyway, so I was copying everything, and then I was going to the Foolery and listening to Ron Elliston too.
Wow.
And I was just listening so much, and I heard people play so many solos, and I was going to jam sessions where everybody was making stuff up. I was getting it. We're supposed to be able to speak this language without, just different every time. And so then one night, Ron asked me if I could play next week because he can't make it. And of course that made me real nervous.
Wow.
And I went home and practiced all the tunes I knew real hard.
Was this your first jazz gig?
That was my first jazz gig.
Wow. And what was that? That club was in D.C.?
Yeah, it was right there at the corner of Pennsylvania Avenue and M Street, where they come together on that point.
Okay.
Going into Georgetown.
Yeah.
It was right there, and there was a hill there, and the place was on the top of that hill, and they called it the top. Well, the top because it was on the top floor.
Okay.
But the place was called the Foolery, and Top of the Foolery was the name of the place.
So this was your first jazz gig?
First jazz gig. Man, I was nervous.
Now, who was in the band?
I can't remember who was playing bass. I think Mike Smith was playing drums.
Okay.
So there's some people that were really, really well versed in jazz. And
were these older guys? At the top?
Well, they were much more experienced guys.
Okay,
Mike wasn't, or older, but anyway. But I kind of got over it, and then it just kind of things started opening up after that a little bit by a little bit.
Yeah. And then you start getting more confident.
More confident.
Yeah.
On certain kind of tunes. If we were doing Green Dolphin Street, I felt okay. But if we were doing something more esoteric, like A Moment's Notice, something that was really moving a mile a minute, I'm glad I'm not getting lost in that one,
So, was your passion for jazz starting to bubble over?
Oh man, well that was just obvious to me because when I finished my master's degree from all this classical music.
Now, where'd you go to college?
University of Maryland.
University of Maryland.
I studied with Evelyn. Then I studied with a great pianist in my master's degree. His name was Roy Johnson.
Roy Johnson.
Dr. Roy Johnson. Yeah, and he played a lot of concerts, and that was what got me studying with him because I had been accepted to Catholic. I was going to study with this guy there who was their resident artist. I heard Roy Johnson's first recital, and first thing I noticed was they had a small Taw's Arts building. They had a small building with a limited number of seating, and the first thing I noticed was all the doors were open and that there were more seats in the foyer, and I think, why do they have all these seats here? Do they have some other event? And it turned out that he had such a high-level reputation that he attracted all these people. He filled up all those seats in the foyer and everything, I was lucky to get a seat on the steps, And he played like one whole book of Chopin etudes. I don't know if you can get into that, but it's just incredible. And he played them all with incredible mastery.
Wow.
And another thing he did, which was really funny, but just showed what what kind of person he was. Right in the middle of his recital, the fire alarm went off right there on the stage. And he just kept on playing. No. And he figured it would just turn off. Well, after about 5 minutes, it didn't turn off. So, and then he stopped in one of the pieces in a certain place, and he just turned to the audience and says, anybody know how to turn that thing off? It's just he wasn't irate about it at
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
He knew things like that could happen.
Yeah, yeah.
And it just showed what a laid back. He was, a very laid back kind of guy, very easygoing, but just when he sits down to play, look out. And so then the alarm finally went off, and he picked it right up at the very next note.
Wow.
Where he was in that
Yeah.
piece. I mean, he was amazing. But anyway, I studied with him and did my master's recital, and I was still majoring in piano performance.
Okay.
So that means when they go to hear your recital, they're not like listening to a guy who's majoring in education.
Yeah.
They're listening to a guy who says, well, I think I'm good enough to be on the concert stage,
Wow.
And so they give you really tough grading.
Yeah.
But I was still getting all A's,
Uh-huh.
so I figured I must have something going on here.
Yeah.
So I was going to continue to do that, continue to do what Evelyn was playing in the trio.
Mm-hmm.
It was a piano trio, which is that's a format that composers would write for. And she did Mozartian. Her favorite composer was Mozart, but they did they did a lot of contemporary music because the violinists like that, and she could just read it down, like I said. And then he was performing too. So they were enrolled. They were employed at the university, but expected to perform a couple of concerts every year.
Gotcha.
And I thought that's not a bad gig.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to go for that.
Okay.
So when I got and I knew I needed a master's degree, and so I had that. So I thought, I'm just going to kind of get out here and see if I can do this. But something about the jazz, when I would play jazz, it was like a magnet.
Wow.
It kept, whenever I'd practice, but now I was including jazz in my practice because I wasn't working towards this recital. I was trying to keep all my recitals together. So it just kept pulling and pulling and pulling. And eventually, when I was getting more gigs, excuse me, when I was in school, I was playing a gig to pay for my tuition. But it wasn't a jazz gig. It was pop music.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I kind of got OD'd on it at that point. I was just when I got done with that gig, I knew that was my last pop gig. I didn't want to do that anymore.
Wow.
And I wouldn't even listen to it anymore.
Wow.
I was just it had just really. I mean, how you have a certain taste for whatever, and somebody gives you like a mega dose of it.
Yeah.
If you like. You like certain wine or whatever, and then you get sick on it, you don't ever want to see that again.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that.
Now, was this the 70s, 80s?
This was the 70s.
Yeah.
I didn't really get into jazz until in the mid to the late 70s.
Okay. Now, and you were playing mostly in D.C. area?
Yeah. Well, I was playing in the D.C. area, and I met up with a bass player, a great bass player by the name of Keter Betts.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And so Keter Betts was getting me to play on some gigs with him.
Gotcha.
And I played. In fact, he ran the Motown organization in D.C. Or
Okay.
he and a couple other people. I don't know who else was involved with it, but he would always call me. Now at that point, I had stopped listening to pop music altogether, and he said, well. The Dells are coming in town, or the Temptations are coming in town, and they need a piano player. And I thought, well, I can play that music. I grew up doing it, and he knew that, so he would hire me to go out on their gigs. And here, that was a whole different thing. See, because if I'm playing Dells music and Temptations music in a copy band, that's one thing. It's like but if you're playing with the real guys, that's a whole different thing, and that was exciting for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I even over at what they called the Capitol Center. Then I played with Michael Jackson's band. With the Jackson 5. When
Really?
Michael was just like this with.
You got to see Michael when he was a kid?
Oh yeah. He was just a little kid.
Wow, that's something.
But he was already. I mean, the whole place was full, and he had such a following. It was all for Michael. You could tell it was all for Michael.
Did you have a fro?
No. No, but I did have long hair, Beatles hair.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah.
Now, what would you say was your favorite decade? Was those 70s? Some people really like the 70s. I remember the 70s. I was a kid. I remember the 80s. It was every decade had a thing.
So, in terms of in
Just
general,
the music,
or
just the music, and you know, and as you were growing, like, was it musically?
Well, musically, I think there were things for every decade that stood out. And once I got to the point where I knew I was going to do jazz, maybe that could be my favorite, just because I had really reached a point where I knew where I was going.
Okay.
And I think when you get to where you can see the road ahead pretty clearly.
Were you playing a lot in the 70s or late 70s or more so in the 80s?
Well, I was playing with Keter by then, and I was playing quite a few jazz gigs. But Keter was great for he was one generation, ahead of me, and he would maybe even two, but he was way ahead in terms of the music ability, and he would always give the generation that I'm coming from. He would always give us advice. We would sit down and listen to Keter.
Yeah.
And it was like after the gig, it would be like a head session with Keter. And one time Keter said to me, he said, "Well, you're coming along pretty good. You got to realize I didn't really dig into jazz until I was, I don't know, maybe 22 or 23 when I finished my master's degree." So people are usually starting way before that. I mean, I mentally maybe started before that, but I was listening, but I didn't really get into it. And he said, "You're doing okay." He said, "But you know what you really need to do? You need to study with a major voice in jazz, a really internationally known jazz giant, the highest you can go." And he was playing with Tommy Flanagan. So I thought, well, that's pretty high.
Yeah.
So he says, I'm gonna get Tommy Flanagan's number. Again, I'm nervous,
Wow.
I talked to Tommy Flanagan.
Wow.
I just thought he would be in a palace somewhere, You get really different ideas about people. But he gave me Tommy Flanagan's number, and so then I finally got up enough courage to call it. And I call it, and his wife answers, and she's just she's saying, "Yeah, what do you want?" Oh, this isn't a palace, I guess, but it's Tommy's palace. And anyway, but she says, "You want to speak to Tommy?" And so then she turns from the phone and yells out, "Tommy!" Wow, that just sounds like my house.
Yeah.
So Tommy Flanagan actually came to the phone and talked to me, and I can barely remember any words because I'm talking to Tommy Flanagan.
Wow.
That transcribed all his solos,
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, I'm not doing any teaching right now, but Roland Hanna is teaching." And so I'd seen Roland playing with the Thad Jones Mel Lewis band and been listening to him ever since.
Okay.
And I thought, wow, Roland Hanna. So then he gives me Roland Hanna's number, and I called Roland, and Roland was much more formal. He's living by himself, and he was a very distinguished, but yet down to earth.
Yeah.
But he would speak in very carefully selected words.
Yeah.
And so after I told him what I wanted to do, and I wanted to study with him and what I'd been doing, he said, "Okay, maybe we could work something out, but I need to hear you play." I had to do an audition.
Wow.
This is back to audition days. And so he says, I told him I had that master's degree and I was playing all this classical music. He says, I want you to send me a tape of yourself playing. I want you to record some of your pieces that you did on your master's recital, and then I want you to record a jazz, at least one or two jazz pieces.
Okay.
And he said, I don't want any accompaniment. I don't want you to have a bass player, a drummer, nothing. I just want to hear the piano.
Wow.
And so, again, I did the same thing I'd been doing before. I worked up some jazz stuff, but I worked it out note for note, which is probably, he knew I was doing that, but at least he knew I was serious enough to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, you can tell when somebody's got something worked out. You can just hear it. So, but I sent him a tape, and then we talked again later, and he said he would take me.
Oh wow!
So I started going up there once every 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I did that for 5 years.
Wow!
And it was pretty incredible. He had me doing things I'd never even thought of.
Really? Wow.
A lot of things I'd never thought of.
Wow!
And he was very honest all the time. He wasn't one of these guys that positive reinforcement is what you need. I'll give you reinforcement when I'm positive you're making it.
Yeah.
That's his version of it.
But you could see yourself progressing.
Yeah, but you know what? A lot of it came after I wasn't studying with him anymore.
Oh wow!
Because he had planted some seeds that took a long time to grow.
Gotcha.
Now
was pianist Reuben Brown around when you was?
Oh my gosh, was he ever? I used to go there. Another place I used to go every Monday. I used to go every Monday to go hear Reuben and Steve.
Really?
Yeah, Reuben and Steve would be playing together down
man.
one
Yeah,
step down.
yeah.
And whenever Reuben couldn't make it, once in a while they'd have me come in and play with.
Wow.
Man, and I was like, wow, I'm feeling some heavy shoes here. I don't know if I want to do this. But they had other people too. He had, Mark. His name was Cohen at the time. Eventually changed it to Copeland.
Now were you on the? Because D.C. had. I know when I got here in '87 in D.C. And there's a jazz community.
Yeah.
Were you in it? Were you like getting into it?
Well, I was kind of into it, but I hadn't been into it from the beginning, like people like Steve were.
Okay.
So I was sort of, I think I was still in the position where I don't, people were maybe saying I don't know what I think of that guy. I think he's pretty good, but, but I didn't really care at that point. I knew what I wanted to do.
What clubs were around? Like in
the one step down was a big deal.
Yeah, remember the one step? Yeah.
Yeah, and there was the Bohemian Caverns, and of course Blues Alley, and Mr. Wise. I used to play at Mr. Wise, and the Pigfoot.
Pigfoot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was a couple other ones. There was Twins. Twins was around, but it wasn't in the same location.
Yeah, it was on Colorado.
Yeah, it was over on Colorado.
You remember Bobby Sanchez?
Oh yeah, he used to be there all the time.
I didn't know, but he started the jam sessions there.
Is that right?
Yeah, Bobby Sanchez.
I can believe that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it.
Man, DC has some characters, man, like Teddy
Affanis.
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
What's Don Dome?
Oh, Don. Now you're getting into some real characters.
Yeah. Nap, Don't Forget the Blues, Turner, Earl Banks. Remember all these? It's like, if you've been here long enough, you see the different changes.
Oh yeah.
And trans. Yeah. I was fortunate to catch some of the old cats. A lot of them passed.
Right.
But I still got to see them. This was a good environment to grow. Now, were you playing in Baltimore as well?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
you started gigging in Baltimore.
Playing at some places in Baltimore, the Haven, places like that. Yeah,
Sportsman's Lounge.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So after college, you decided to join the Air Force. Man.
Well, after college, I was gigging for a while, and I had a regular gig at there was another club called the Wharf in Old Town. Mm-hmm. And I played there with a quartet for a number of years, and other places too. But it was during that time I was studying with Roland Hanna.
Okay.
And Roland was getting me more and more. He was trying to prepare me to move to New York. That's what he really wanted me to do. And at that point he was giving me lessons all through the afternoon. Like I would come, and he would have other students, and then I'd go away to get lunch or something. He said, "Well, come back in a couple hours, and we'll take it up from there."
Wow.
So we were getting pretty close at that point, and then it got to where I'd go up there and I'd go to his gigs, and he would even let me sit in.
In New York?
Yeah.
Okay.
So and he was introducing me to people, and I realized that he was preparing me for that kind of thing. And I was maybe going to move to New York, although every time I walked around the city, I really felt like a fish out of water, you know.
Yeah.
But in any case, right during that time, you know, they say it rains, it pours. Right during that time, somebody called me and said, you know, the Air Force Band is doing piano auditions now. And I just thought I'd tell you about that. Maybe you'd want to go to that. And I thought, Air Force Band, what do I want to do that for? And I thought, well, if that comes through, that would just kind of be another option. So just on a whim, I mean, just at the last minute, you know, people prepare for those auditions.
Yeah.
But I had no preparation. I just went and winged it.
Really?
And I got a call back that day. They wanted me to do it.
Wow.
Yeah, so then I was like, oh man, what am I doing? I know Roland wants me to move to New York.
Yeah.
So I finally decided to do it for one hitch. So I was going to do it for 4 years. I said, because I didn't have any money.
Yeah.
I was paying next to nothing for rent, and you know, I was just making it on my little teaching I was doing, and my private teaching, and the jazz gigs. So you can imagine how much that was. It wasn't very much. So I thought, well, I'll put some money together for these 4 years, and then I'll move to New York. So that's what I told Roland, and that's what I told myself.
Yeah.
But the problem is, you do get used to that money.
Yeah.
And the musicians I was playing with were really fine musicians, you know, especially
Because you also was part of the Airmen of Note.
Yeah, well, when I first got in, I was playing in one of the combos. That's what I auditioned for. But then the guy that ran the Airmen of Note heard me playing in the combo, and that was kind of my audition for him, even though I didn't do an audition, a formal audition. But he heard me play, and he said, you know, have you ever thought about playing in the Note? And it kind of took me back, and I thought, well. But then I said, I don't want to see the guy that's in there get pushed into something he doesn't want to do.
Yeah.
So, and then finally he took a gig. He took the early out. You can get all your pay, all your a certain amount, to get out early. So then the leader Pete Barenbreg, then he came over and said, well, now why don't you do this? So then I did, and then I'm looking at all these really great musicians I'm playing with, and I'm thinking, you know, if I moved to New York, it'd be great if I was playing with the wonderful musicians I know that live in New York.
Yeah.
But they already have people they're playing with that are already great.
Mm-hmm.
And who am I to come and say, you know, can I play on your gig?
Yeah.
That ain't going to happen. I'm going to be playing with probably people that are on the same level that the guys on the Note, who are just about as good as everybody else.
You know, man, some of all of the Airmen of Note cats and military cats, they are on a high level.
Oh man, I mean, you talk about people like Teddy Baker.
Yeah, man.
Look out.
Yeah. Did you know this tenor player named Saul?
Saul Miller.
Saul Miller.
Yeah, he was Reggie Miller's brother and Cheryl Miller's brother.
And some reason he couldn't play it. He was a great.
He was great, and he and I used to room together when we were on the road.
Really?
Yeah.
He was in the Airmen of Note as well?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was in the Airmen of Note, and he was infatuated with John Coltrane.
Wow.
And especially Giant Steps.
Yeah.
So whenever I was on the road with him, he would find out where there's, because we'd be usually at a military base, and there'd be a piano room somewhere. And he would say, I just found out there's some pianos over in this building over here. Let's go over. And we would do Giant Steps in every key.
Wow.
He would start out he started out with the first chord's B, and he'd just keep moving up in minor thirds.
Wow.
And then he'd jump up a half step and move up in minor thirds again. And we would just go through 2 times, one for him and one for me. And then, then I'm going to have to transpose it to, okay, now we're starting on D. Okay, what are we going to do? And now we're starting on F. Oh, now we're starting on A flat.
Yeah.
Oh, now he's starting on C sharp. Oh, my God.
Yeah, man.
But Saul could play that tune in upside down, inside out. And then all of his soul. I remember him and Bob Berg. We had all these guests. So Bob Berg was a guest at one point, and they were going at it on was it Friday night at Cadillac Club?
Really?
Yeah, Bob's tune, and they were playing toe to toe on trading fours on that.
Anybody tape that?
I bet you that the Air Force has got a tape of it.
Yeah, wow.
But I remember when they were all done, them them doing a high five.
Wow.
Just like when I saw Ted Baker and Branford going
Really?
toe to toe
Wow.
over at Schlesinger a few years ago, and that's what they did, a high five. I mean,
Wow.
I could tell that Branford had a lot of respect for Teddy.
Yeah. Wow.
But Saul did the same thing, you know.
Yeah.
But he had some kind of injury.
Uh-huh.
He had a special neck brace or a special holder for his saxophone at one point. But then after a while, you know, he had to just stop playing. I don't think he's doing much playing anymore. It was a sad story. 'Cause he was a great player.
Yeah. He moved out of the area.
I think he moved out to L.A. or someplace.
Yeah. Now, what's the difference between? I was asking you earlier. The Air Force Band and the Airmen of Note. I mean.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So when you audition for, so say you read in Downbeat or some magazine that the Airmen of Note are looking for, let's say, a bass player.
Uh-huh.
So probably that bass player did what a lot of the guys do. He probably stayed for 20 years. So you know that gig is not coming back for another 20 years or so.
Yeah.
So you better do that audition, or maybe, well, of course, there's the Navy band, there's the Army band, and Marine band. They all have bass players, and they'll be eventually retiring too.
Yeah.
But there's not that many, so a lot of people show up for the auditions. So let's say 100 people showed up to the audition for that. They sent tapes
for one
gig.
Wow.
And they sent tapes in, and they filter through the tapes. Finally, they get 10 guys that they think that they're really interested in. A lot of them don't live anywhere near. They have to fly in to do the real in-person audition. And they finally boils down to one person, and then they choose them. Okay, so you got the spot, and you think, I got the gig. All right, I got the gig. And they say, well, and then you go to the first sergeant, and the first sergeant says, okay, now you got to join the military. And you go, what? Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's in the Air Force.
Yeah.
Well, it must be a formality, right? It's not any big deal. No, it's not a formality. You got to join the Air Force just like anybody else has to join the Air Force. So you start right there at recruitment, and you know, and they have to accept you. So if you've got, I mean, I remember when I was going through that part of it, I had one speeding ticket in the last 5 years, and they were thinking about not letting me get in just because of that. I mean,
really?
Wow. Yeah, it's that they look you over that closely, and everything, and so getting in the Air Force was different than getting in the Airmen of Note. They both had challenges, but different ones. So you finally, they say, okay, well, we'll let you go. And so you think, okay, now I can join the Airmen of Note. No, you got to go through boot camp. And you got to pass, you got to pass that too. You can be flunked on boot camp.
Wow.
So you go through, well, then it was 6 weeks. Now I think it's 8 weeks or more. And there was all the physical training and the intellectual training and the arms training and everything.
Wow.
You imagine boot camp, but the good news was the Air Force boot camp was the least difficult in a lot of ways. They did a lot of classroom time, so if you were good at school, which I didn't have too much trouble with that part, so I was good at that. And then the physical training was much less than, like, say, the Army.
Got you.
You know what you hear about things that the Army makes you do, and Navy too, and of course the Marines. Well, the Marines doesn't even have a boot camp. They know no musicians would sign up for that.
But how was your experience overall with being in the Army?
In the Air Force?
I'm sorry, the Air Force band.
Well, once I got past the boot camp part, and I was actually doing my gig, it was great. I mean, I was playing with fantastic musicians, and we were on the road. The problem is, once I was doing the Airmen of Note gig, we were on the road. Pete came to me and he said, "Well, we're on the road a lot this year. We're going to be away 180 days of the year."
Ooh.
So that's for me that was a lot because I wasn't used to being away at all.
Yeah.
So that took a lot to get used to. And as a matter of fact, I stayed 20 years but I didn't stay any longer. I could have because the traveling was still so much.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to do any more.
Do you ever regret not moving to New York?
You know, you hate to go through life with regrets, but I kind of wonder what that would be like.
Gotcha. Yeah. Let's talk. Let's talk about the late great Andrew White.
Oh man.
You played with Andrew.
And his
recorded
last
with him and
band
the
for
whole
about
nine.
10 years.
Yeah, 10 years.
Maybe
Wow.
maybe a little more.
Do you remember when you first met Andrew?
I do. I remember when I first heard Andrew.
Okay.
And he was playing at the Corcoran. Now, the Corcoran Art Gallery was a pretty good venue for jazz at that time too. I'm remembering that. And they had also the Cellar Door. You know, I'm thinking of other places when you asked me about the clubs that are not. And the Corcoran is not. I don't think they're doing that anymore. But they did.
Yeah, I remember playing there.
Yeah. So, and I was in school, and Gene was playing with Andrew, Gene Rush.
Okay.
And so was Steve and Jimmy Hops. So they were playing Andrew's tunes, and I went there and heard them play, and just remember Andrew was so entertaining to watch. Not just entertaining, but interesting.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't sit there with the proud brow. You know.
Yeah.
And, you know, he had a good time.
Yeah.
He would dance around and laugh, you know. And I remember at one point they were doing some kind of bass figure continuously, and Jimmy, I think it was it was Eric Ravatt was playing drums, and Eric was playing his solo, and Eric was known for polyrhythms, you know, and things like that. And of course Andrew was hearing all of it. He was hearing both of the rhythms at the same time, and on top of this figure that was going on. And Andrew just, at one point, he just broke out laughing.
Really?
And I remember thinking, I wish I knew what Andrew was hearing so I could be laughing too. But there was something that Eric was playing that was just knocked him out. Just like, you know, like maybe Andrew's thinking, I didn't think anybody could play those two rhythms together or whatever.
Did he have his high waters on?
Oh yeah, he always noticed that. He that was his one of his trademarks. You
So
know?
when did he get to hear you play?
Well, you know, he was he had been out there for a long time, and I just went to hear him play a lot, and then I was playing a gig with Steve at one time downtown every week. And Steve said to me that Andrew is going to be doing a union gig, and he's looking for a guy that's in the union. I happen to be in the union. That's probably a good thing I got from that copy band that I was in. You know, we all joined the union. We had to, and so I just kept doing it just as pretty much a tax write-off at one point. But so Steve said, "Well, you know, he had been playing with me, and he knew how I played, and so it was a recommendation from Steve, and Steve said, well, why don't you try Wade Beach?" And maybe Andrew kind of knew who I was, but he didn't know that much about me, and so the next thing I knew, I got a call from Andrew White.
Wow!
And so we hadn't met that much, and then he said, "Well, I'm gonna do this gig, and I'm gonna send you some music," and so I got this package in the mail. He always wrapped it up real good and put cardboard in and special delivery and whatever. And I got this music, and oh man, it was hard to read. I mean, Andrew, he wrote everything out for you. For both hands to all. I mean, that's not usually you're reading a lead sheet. There was very few lead sheets. It was all written out, and he had every note memorized. And so I worked really hard to learn this stuff. And I remember my father, because they had moved to a place. They had a house that was sort of a getaway place for them, but they did have a piano there. So So I went to visit them, and I had Andrew's music, and I was the Andrew rehearsal was coming up. So I was there, and I sat down. I mean, I had been doing it at home, but when I went to visit them, I spent most of the day practicing Andrew's music.
Wow.
And I remember my father saying, "How much are you getting paid for this?" he was a businessman at that point, you know. And I said, "I don't know, maybe the gig pays $150. And he said, "How many hours have you practiced already?" I said, "It's not about that." I said, "I really want to play." He said, "Yeah, but if you got paid by the hour, you'd be making like a nickel. Maybe you'd be owing money." I said, "Well, you know, it's not about that." But in any case, I realized that I was really putting a lot of time in on it. And I went to the rehearsal, and Andrew just totally wore me out.
Really?
He just I mean, he made me really nervous. And when we played, there was one thing that we played, I think it was his theme. And he had written something in there that I was playing wrong. It was a cluster. And there was like one note in the middle of that cluster.
Wow.
And he stopped the rehearsal. And he said that note is supposed to be a D. You're playing a C sharp.
Wow.
I mean, he just had everything so in his ears.
Yeah.
He wouldn't let anything go by, and he was stopping everybody, but he stopped me for there. I mean, Steve, of course, was used to it because he'd been playing with him for a long time. But I thought, this guy is gonna.
And I also heard that some of his songs, he had specific voicings.
Oh yeah.
There
were voicings that I would never have thought of playing.
Yeah. Wow.
You know, they were his ideas about the voicings.
Oh wow.
But he also had a very big hand. So, and then of course when he's sitting down working it out like this at this speed, but it's supposed to be going like this, not only can't I play it that fast, I can't even reach it.
Wow.
You know, because he has got a bigger hand than I do.
Yeah.
So I kind of had, without him getting too upset, I had to sort of rearrange some of the stuff to fit my hand.
Wow.
But eventually I knew what was important to him. So, you know, you would know that, okay, you can change this and this, but don't change that, you know, because he's listening for that.
Yeah. So did Andrew pay for rehearsals?
Yeah, he paid well actually for jazz gig. If we had a gig at Blues Alley.
He paid you for the gig and the rehearsal?
And the rehearsal, and he would break it down and tell you you're getting this much for the rehearsal and this much for the gig, and he'd take you to his business. It would just be his table, his kitchen table, but that would be the business meeting, and he was a very good businessman.
Wow.
He reminded me of my father in that way. And you know, I mean, in a sense, it was not like my father, because I would just practice all I could to get there, and I don't start the time clock when I would start rehearsing. You know how it is. No matter what you have to do, you want to play good.
Yeah. And how did you and Steve Novosel connect?
Oh wow. Oh, I remember. I was listening to Steve for years and years. You know, down at the Caverns.
Gotcha.
And with the Trio ESP, and then with Andrew's groups. And I'd hear Andrew play.
Okay.
And then I'd also see Steve at the One Step Down with different people,
Gotcha.
and of course with Reuben.
Yeah.
But I had never played with him. And actually, it was after this rock band, when I finally got my master's degree, and I quit that top 40 band, there was a band up the street playing. It was another big band, but it was playing commercial music kind of. But there was some interesting people in there, like Richie Cole was playing sax, and Steve was playing bass, but he was playing electric bass.
Oh, okay.
And they had somebody from the Navy band playing piano, but he was having to quit because he had another commitment going on. So I got a call from a guy named Joe Bavello, who was running the band, and he said, "I wonder if you could do this gig." And so I did. I took that gig, and a lot of the music I already knew, but they were doing some jazz tunes too. You know, they were mixing it all up. And Steve was on that gig, so that's when I really first started working with Steve.
So over the year, y'all became good friends.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we got pretty good.
And we're doing a tribute to Andrew White in a couple weeks.
Yeah, the 3rd, I think.
Yeah, the 3rd of April. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that.
Me too.
Yeah,
we did one. We've been doing them at Blues Alley.
Yeah. So
And we got
I'm
another
honored, man, because Andrew was my hero.
Well, he was a lot of people's heroes, but you know what? Andrew scared some people too.
Huh?
Andrew, some people thought he was kind of scary.
Really?
You know, I mean, they didn't know what to make of him because he was so unique.
Yeah, I understood him from the. Yeah, I was able to pick. Yeah.
Yeah, I know you did because you were at a lot of the gigs when we played at Blues Alley.
Yeah.
Andrew played a couple of gigs at Blues Alley almost every year. We played up in New York too at a place called the Jazz Gallery.
Yeah. Did you do that marathon concert that he had?
No, that was before I was playing with him.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, might have been with Kevin Toney or somebody like that. You know,
who just passed.
We just lost Kevin. That was a sad day.
Yeah. Wow. All right, we almost to the end. I wanted to talk about now. Have you recorded under your name? Like, you have any recordings?
Well, I recorded a lot, of course, with the Air Force Band. And as far as having my own group, I'm kind of, I guess I've dragged my feet on that.
Okay.
But I did get some calls in the last couple of years from a guy by the name of E.C. Coleman. Do you know him? He plays drums. Yeah, I worked with him at the HR 57 over on East Street.
Yeah, I think I know the cat. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And so he's now doing some producing. He lives in Atlanta, I think, or someplace out of town, and he's doing some producing. And so he had me come in and do some recording with a lot of different singers, but he also had me do some recording as a trio.
Okay.
So it's pretty much still under his project name, but I'm playing there. I think we did. He had me do some solo stuff and some trio stuff. He just sent me a couple of things. One was a tune Gingy, and another one was If I Only Had a Brain, from the Wizard of Oz. Yeah, that's right. So we did a couple of piano features, and then we did some other tunes with some singers. And
anyway. Can we expect in the future maybe
I should do that. I'm gonna.
I think you should, because I think you, even though I'm glad you're documented with other aggregations, but you got to put your own thing out. Do you compose as well?
Yeah. I did some compositions for a solo gig I did at the Arts Center a few years ago.
Okay.
And some sort of fun tunes, I played them all solo piano. And that's one thing Roland left me with. You need to be able to play the whole piano. When I came to him, I was playing what I had heard people do on recordings with bass players and drum. And, piano players are staying out of the way and playing just down to a certain place.
Yeah.
And Roland had to say, the piano does go on to that note down there.
Wow, yeah.
So, and then when he would play, he'd be, and so he had me improvising over classical compositions, things I had never done before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and playing the whole piano. But when I had to do that gig at the Arts Center, I didn't feel intimidated by I'm going to be just by myself. You get used to playing the whole piano.
Yeah. So we learned about you as a student and getting to the point. Now let's talk about you as an educator. Yeah. So you've taught at numerous places. What has your experience been like as a teacher educator? Well,
once you this area tends to categorize everybody, so that I've been teaching at George Mason now for about 20 years.
Okay.
So they have what every school kind of does this. They have a jazz department. So I don't teach any of the classical students unless the teacher says, well, I need you to loosen up a little bit, so I want you to study some jazz now.
Okay. Gotcha.
So I get them to play. I get them to do exactly what I did when I was doing Oscar Peterson. They'll learn. They read really well, so they'll play the solo note for note. teaching them to improvise is another thing. So that's the biggest challenge, is to teaching. Do you find that teaching improvisation is kind of hard? Most of the students are shy about that. That's what I find.
Well, I teach elementary kids, so I don't. But I am teaching at Bowie.
Yeah.
And you know how to find out? I found out that the first thing I ask the kids, do you listen to jazz? Because if you don't listen to it, you don't know, you don't have a perspective. You know, it's not just music on the sheet. You know, it's a language. So
right.
That's the first question I ask them, do you listen?
Yeah.
So, I don't know anything that comes out of nothing.
Exactly.
But I have certain concepts, but that's the first thing. Like one thing when I hear your story and I talk to people who really play jazz, they had a desire to. They had a yearn, like a search. Let me figure. They wanted. It was like intrinsic kind of thing, and which made you go listen, go to jam session, study, and try to figure some stuff out. And so I think you got to at least bring that to the table.
Well, and I have to say that most of the students that study with me at Mason have a given amount of that. There's a certain amount of that. I ask them the same question, and usually they can tell me who they listen to.
Okay.
And when we start learning a new tune, the great thing about this YouTube thing is that I can find it by the original artist, and we can play it right there at the session. They look at it.
Yeah.
If they're playing, if maybe they're going to start out with Horace Silver's Song for My Father, something easy to do. Well, we're gonna get Horace Silver. We're gonna get him in here playing it, and you can hear how the person that wrote this tune played, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, I use that. YouTube is a great asset. Yeah,
it's amazing, and then now they've heard.
You have one of those boom speakers, like when you.
Yeah, I do. I got that one of those Bose.
Bluetooth. I got a Bluetooth.
Oh yeah,
and I can just go to YouTube on my phone, and it just.
All my students have that. And I got it on my Bose. I usually don't use it. I usually just run the wire. That's an old guy.
School. Oh wow, yeah. Now you also taught at Northern Virginia Community College.
I did.
Were you there with Herb Smith? Did you know Herb Smith?
Yeah, I was there when Herb Smith just first started. I was at the Alexandria campus.
Okay.
And I'm teaching. Now it's years later. I stopped teaching there when I was in the Air Force, and then years later, just a few years ago, they asked me if I would come back and teach a few people interested in jazz, and it's convenient because it's almost in my backyard. But he was over at the Annandale one.
Gotcha. I interviewed him, and he was telling me about. I want to ask you about the story about Phineas Newborn.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
He's from Memphis.
Yeah.
And he so share with the story about Phineas when you met Phineas Newborn.
Right. Well, Herb. I was playing that gig at the Wharf.
Okay.
And Herb knew him, and and brought him into the Wharf and had him sit in. And I remember the drummer on that gig, Mel Hardy. Maybe I don't know if you ever met Mel, but Phineas was sitting down, and he just basically said, "Well, come in when you hear me, leading you in."
Wow.
So he started playing, and Mel's up there ready to hit the ride cymbal whenever he can tell it's time. He's waiting for the bom bom bee bom bee bom, some kind of intro. And Mel's holding that stick up, and he's looking over at me, and he's looking over at Phineas, and Phineas is just playing so much piano, you can't tell where he wants the drummer and drum. And Mel sat there with a stick like this the whole tune. It was a piano solo.
Wow.
But Phineas was, when I first heard him, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was hearing Daoud, that Clifford Brown tune that was written for another pianist that was in D.C. that Steve had introduced me to. Roosevelt Wardell was another great pianist, and he supposedly Clifford Brown wrote that for Roosevelt Wardell.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and it meant it was a high. Daoud meant in Muslim, it meant a very high level, and I guess that's what he was calling Roosevelt.
Wow.
Anyway, he wrote that tune, but Phineas was playing it on this recording, and first of all, he played the whole tune at a breakneck tempo. He could play both hands together on the same melody, almost as if it were. I don't know, there was something spiritual going on, because it was like he wouldn't have to practice it. You could tell he didn't have to practice it, because he was making up new stuff in the right hand, and the left hand would go right along with it, note for note.
Did you know who he was prior to him?
No, I just heard this recording. I mean, this was after I was really interested in jazz, and when I heard this guy, I mean, I heard Oscar, and I'd been transcribing Oscar, but Phineas was kind of in a different, at least in terms of those two-handed lines. Yeah, because I knew all Oscar's two-handed lines, and he would use them as he worked them out. But Phineas was making up new stuff as he was going. I could tell.
Wow.
You know, you get to a point where you can just intuit stuff.
He was special.
He was special. He had something different going on up here, because the left hand, and he was playing that melody at such an incredible speed, and then he kept playing the solo at that same incredible speed.
Wow.
And with both hands, and there was the bass and the drums are going on. But of course, after a while, he got into the chords and everything.
Wow.
But it was, I mean, I just heard that, and I just went, oh, I just can't believe.
Did you get to talk to him?
Well, I did, but you know, he had some issues going on at the end, near the end of his life, and so when you talk to him, it was difficult.
Gotcha. You ever see Trey?
I didn't. I could have. He was down at the Caverns, and my dad went to hear him.
Oh wow!
And my dad came back saying, "I don't know what I just heard," because Train was playing those long sets with continuous. You know, he said, because he was used to hearing people like the old school guys, Coleman Hawkins, and people who were just stuck to the melody a lot. And all of a sudden, there's these streams of sound coming out of the saxophone.
Wow.
And so I remember my dad telling me about that.
You ever see Cannonball?
Nope, I didn't see Cannonball. I could have. That was during the time when I was in school.
Oh, wow.
When they came to the Caverns, and I wasn't really. I let a lot of good opportunities go by just because I didn't really know what I was missing, to tell you the truth. I had to learn about it. I had to have regrets later on.
That's all right. We all got them.
But I did hear, once I was in tune to the whole scene. Then I went out and heard everybody I could.
Yeah.
And at the Caverns, one thing that was interesting, Gene, the trio ESP played behind Eddie Harris, and I thought I was going to hear Eddie Harris play Compared to What and stuff like that, and he was playing like Train.
Who?
Eddie Harris.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. He was playing this really avant-garde stuff.
Wow. Yeah.
And I could not believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a bad cast.
Yeah.
Yeah. A few more questions. Final questions. Have you played the shad piano?
I have.
Yeah, what you think?
I love it.
Yeah.
Warren, Warren is in a lot of ways one of my heroes.
Really?
Because he did all the music, but he went beyond that. I mean, he was always an enterprising guy.
Yeah.
He had a magazine at one time.
Yeah.
He had a vocal group at one time.
Yeah. Oh, you remember? Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's when I was. It's funny because I tell Warren, I used to, in the early '90s, late '80s, early '90s, I was playing with Keith Kilgwett.
Oh yeah.
Tacoma Station.
Yeah.
And Warren Shad would come in with these 3-piece suits.
Yeah.
Like a bit, but sometimes he would sit in and play.
Yeah.
And I was like, who's this cat? So I didn't take him serious because he seemed like just a cat that was, music was like some kind of hobby or something.
He's kind of low key. He played with all kinds of people.
Yeah, and then I heard about who he was, and then I think that's when he had his magazine. Mm-hmm. But he figured it out. So I talked to him today, matter of fact.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sure you know his dad was a piano guy.
Yeah.
He had.
Did you know his dad?
I didn't know him, but I went to his funeral, but I remember when he passed. But it was.
Okay.
But Warren, Warren and I were pretty close by then, and he had taken over the piano business.
Yeah.
And then eventually he created this shed, and he used to have these sessions. Remember, at his house.
Yep.
And we'd be on YouTube, and I'd be playing at the shed piano.
Yeah. Yep.
And I remember going over there and visiting with his dog Rocky.
Yeah.
Man, that was so much fun.
You know Rocky passed.
I know. Warren came down one night. I was playing at Blues Alley.
Yeah.
I think with the George Mason group.
Uh-huh.
And he said, the main thing, he said, I wanted to come down to hear you, but I've heard you a lot of times before. I just wanted to tell you that Rocky, because I used to have so much fun with Rocky.
Yeah. Wow.
But Warren is, he's done a great job with that shad piano, and he had it at the East Coast, the Mid-Atlantic.
Yeah.
I keep calling it the old name. Remember with Ronnie Wells started that. But he had that piano there at the Mid-Atlantic, and he gets that piano scene at a lot of places. He knows how to do that.
Yeah. Now he's doing musical band instruments.
Really, more than just the piano.
Yeah, he got shad instruments going out the door.
Oh my gosh! Now see, that's something new.
Yeah.
But I'm not surprised because he's always moving forward.
All right, so what's next for Wade Beach?
Next for me?
Yeah.
Oh man, I get to play. I get to play with Antonio Parker.
Oh, thank you, man.
Yeah, that's going to be. Right now, I'm playing this gig 4 nights a week. That it's just at a low key place, but I'm playing with these really really great musicians, and I'm enjoying the gig. I'm there 4 nights a week, and play with James King on bass.
Yeah.
Ephraim's playing bass part of the time. Ephraim Wolfhook. And then Jeff Antoniuk is playing sax on a couple.
Okay.
And then also,
do you still enjoy playing? Do you still love it?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Oh, but as long as it's music, I like. Yeah. If I had to go play another one of those Motown gigs, but I'd like it if it was with Little Anthony or somebody,
Yeah, I got you. How can people contact you?
Wade Beach
You can look
Music.
in the camera.
Yeah, okay.
Talk to the people.
Yeah, it's just, my email is wadebeachmusic@gmail.com.
Okay.
WADEBEACH. And, and my phone,
Yeah. Are you on like Facebook and all that kind of thing?
No, I'm not really a social media kind of guy.
Okay, it's all good. All right. Well, man, it's been a great time.
It's been a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, man.
It's kind of reminiscing.
Yeah, man. So thanks. I want to thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you for having me here, really.
Oh, without a doubt. We had to get you on here, man.
And I'm just so much looking forward to our gig together next week.
Yeah, I got to go
Everybody come and hear us down at Blues Alley next Wednesday, right?
Yep, April
3rd.
2024.
Yeah, and it'll be, I guess maybe you've already gone over it, but it's Nasser Abiday on drums.
Yes.
Steve Novosel playing bass, and yourself playing saxophone, alto.
And I think Nasser's going to bring in another saxophone, a tenor player. So
okay.
I can't think of his name right off the head.
Yeah, well, Andrew used to do that.
Yeah,
He'd bring different people in.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
So anyway, man, thanks again.
Thank you.
I see you in a few weeks, a couple weeks.
Yeah, right. Well, probably before that, we'll be doing a rehearsal.
Yes, sir. No doubt about it.
Looking forward to it.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, there it is. You've been listening to the great Mr. Wade Beach right here on A Conversation in Jazz. And we'll see you on the next one.